Now, the thing that we're investing in is called a regional center. Okay. What is a regional center? Again, coming from, outside the States, the resonance of that word, regional center, is like, what am I investing in? Am I
Yeah,
investing in a community center? Is it a hospital?
yeah,
Is
yeah,
it
yeah.
a youth center or something? Or is it a real estate project?
Yeah, it's a little misleading what a regional center is. So a regional center is a company, it's a private entity that received a license from the Immigration Service to sponsor investment projects such that investors in that project could then qualify for a green card based on the money they put into this project. So in a way, it's almost like a franchise, if you want to call it. It's almost like a brand. Somebody might have a restaurant and they want to make that restaurant a McDonald's, so they execute an agreement with with McDonald's to have a license to then work under that brand. So like I said, if you could do a direct investment, and maybe we'll talk a little bit later what that's about, but the vast
Sure.
majority of people, probably 96% of all investors, go into a regional center project. Now, you're not technically investing the money in the regional center. The regional center is basically the entity that provides the structure and the legal basis for getting the green card. The money is technically going into the development, the project itself. So how it works is developers will execute an agreement with a regional center. Usually it works the other way. Usually the regional centers go out and look for good projects in their area. So a regional center has a license only in a specific geographic area. And that geographic area generally cannot cross state lines. And usually it's given for a particular kind of metro area. So there's regional centers, say, lots in Florida, for example, lots in California, but generally they don't cover the whole state. They only cover certain metro areas. So somebody might have a regional center and it covers, Southeast Florida. In most cases, it's not going to cover Northern Florida. So the regional center looks for promising deals that are promising projects that are in its geographic scope. And they'll find a good deal. They say they'll need an investor, or sorry, a developer. They like the project. They might know the developer already. Maybe they had a previous history with them. And they'll execute an agreement such that the regional center will sponsor. And by sponsor, I don't mean they're putting money into it. By sponsor, we mean they execute an affiliation agreement whereby, yeah, the regional centers, yeah, we'll work with you guys on this project. And, that will allow investors in your project to get a green card. The structure, how it works, is usually what happens is a separate, it's called a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, gets formed. And so you have the developer here, you have the regional center, and then you have the investors here. The regional center will generally create another entity, this SPV, usually a partnership or an LLC. And then the EB5 investors will put their money into this SPV, and then the money goes from that SPV to the developer. The regional center generally, I mean, it depends on the structure, but usually the regional center is that entity that controls that SPV. And they just, they monitor it. They make sure, okay, investor XYZ put their money in. They execute an agreement with the developer as to when the money will go into the project. Like some developers say, hey, we only need, 10 million this quarter, but next quarter we're going to need, another 20 million. And so it's the regional center that kind of monitors, the cash flows and the movement of the funds and make sure,
Right.
that everything's okay for the investors and the developers.
Regional center is the group of people or the company that puts together the structure to enable that project to receive funds from foreign investors so that the foreign investors can get their green cards and the project can get extra funding. That's
Right.
basically what the regional center does. Regional center, however, is not necessarily the project itself. There is a developer that is developing the project. Am I correct?
You're correct. Although there are some developers that have their own regional center. And I'm not saying necessarily that's a bad thing, but you have to understand there's a potential for conflict of interest, right? Because
Right.
the developer is getting the money. The developer also
Mm-hmm.
manages the regional center, and the regional center is supposed to be the guy that kind of makes sure everybody's playing above the table and playing, following what they're supposed to be doing and stuff like that. So I'm not saying it's a very dangerous situation, but there could be a conflict of interest. So from an investor's perspective, it's usually safer if the regional center is completely independent from the developer, because that just makes sure you've got somebody looking out for the investor's interests if something comes up. Now, you will see, and you maybe have run across these too, there are sometimes some developers, even especially in Miami here, and currently there's a couple projects where they try to convey that idea to the investors. They try to say, hey, look, this is kind of like in Turkey. We're building, a condos. We're building a building of apartments or, condos or something. And you
Right,
can
in a
buy them.
nice area, looking nice and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's like, hey, I'm gonna buy real estate in the US and they're gonna give me a green card.
Yes. And the thing is, I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but you got to be careful. Technically, that's not how it works. I mean, the developer might promote it that way, but that's more of a marketing, I don't want to say a trick, but it's a marketing catch to get people interested. The reality is, and I'm not saying you're not buying an apartment. I mean, I'm not saying they're tricking you in that regards. You are buying an apartment, but it's not so much that you're, it's really two different transactions that you're executing in those kind of scenarios. You're executing
Mhm.
an agreement to buy the apartment and you're doing an EB5 agreement. The developer sometimes will make it sound like it's one and the same. Like, here, you're buying this apartment and you're getting a green card on top of it. But it's technically doesn't work like that. And we don't have to go into all the legalities, but I would just say you cannot do that as one uniform or unified contract. USCIS has clearly said, and there were scandalous projects kind of, 10, 15 years ago where people would do that. They said, here, we will sell you, you'll invest $500,000. We'll sell you 1 or 2 units. You'll get ownership to those units. And at the end, instead of getting your money back, you just take title to the units. And USCIS explicitly came out and said, you can't do this. This is not, okay, according to the rules and the law and stuff like that.
So, what are some of the potential risks we're looking at, Charles? Especially here in Miami, these projects are marketed heavily, and for from a foreigner's perspective, of course, they don't. I mean, it's hard for any non-attorney or non-regional center to understand the dynamics and how EB5
Yeah, yeah,
works.
yeah.
And it's, think about it, you're a foreign investor. Who are you working with? You're working with either a migration agent or you're working with a company based here in the US or
Uh-huh.
working with a regional center. You're not necessarily as well versed about the laws and regulations. And for you, okay, I'm buying an apartment and I'm getting, okay, so you've executed the payment and you did those 2 agreements that you talked about. What are some of the potential risks that those people would encounter in short to medium
Sure.
term?
So if we just talk about the risk of this subset of deals where they're selling you an apartment or something. So we're just talking about that. We're not talking about most projects which are really different, which don't involve real estate. And we can talk about that in a second. But if we're talking
Right.
about specifically a deal you're saying where, hey, they're selling you an apartment and they're saying, hey, on top of that, you can get the green card. What are the risks? And I can speak from experience because we've had clients that have been in these projects. The biggest risk I would say, and again, it's not the end of the world, but it's a financial strain for clients when they weren't expecting this. Here's what the biggest risk could be. Let's say the apartment costs $1 million. Usually what the developer will say is they'll say, okay, it costs $1 million. You put in 800,000 right now. And let's say the closing on the apartment is going to be in 2 years. And at the time of the closing, we will just set off the 800 you already contributed towards purchasing the apartment, right? So the idea is, okay,
Right.
when it closes in 2 years, you only have to put in another 200,000. Well, what's the risk in this? I'll admit the risk of this happening is slightly lesser now than it was 5 years ago because when we had COVID, it was causing lots of delays, but with the processing of the EB5 visas. But here's what the risk is. The risk is you're 2 years down the road. The developer says, okay, the apartment's ready. You have to take title. You have to provide the rest of the money. But let's say your EB5 petition has not been reviewed yet. You haven't even gotten the first green card. You can't take your money out of, the investment. And when you're taking title to it, technically what you're doing is you're taking the money out of the developer and it's kind of going over to you because, right, you're buying this apartment. This is now your property.
Right.
And so the money is no longer at risk. And that's a violation of the EB5. So what happens in cases like this is they might come to you and say, okay, we have to close on the apartment. The investor is thinking, okay, I got to just put in another 200. But no, the developer says, no, because your EB5 was delayed or you haven't gotten your first green card yet, you've got to put in another 800,000 because we can't touch that money yet because you're not allowed to take it out of the project. And so that's the biggest risk, I would say, with these kind of things. You could get stuck with having to pay twice. Then you close on the apartment. And then maybe later, 2, 3 years later, when you do get the green card and you're allowed to take out your EB5 money, then you can get the 800,000 out. But there's going to be a period of time when you're going to have to invest maybe 1,800,000, right? Instead of just that million we talked about, if that's clear. So that's the biggest risk. Again,
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world. You still get your green card, you get your apartment, but you might have to freeze up a lot more money than you were anticipating.